Title IX. I give a whole talk on Title IX, generally in June of each year because it was passed on June 23rd, 1972. And there were three people who really helped me with this talk. Connie Goodwin, who is the Chief of Staff for Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska, who's generally thought of as the father of Title IX. Donna Deverona, as Howard Cosell would call her, Donna Deverona, who won 2 gold medals in 1964 in Tokyo as a 17-year-old swimming, and Nancy Hogshead Maker, who won the gold medal in the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, and they keep me up to date on Title IX. Billie Jean King didn't pass Title IX. In fact, she wasn't even part of it, but she was part of it. Her aggressive equal rights stance in the 1960s was part of the sea change that culminated in getting the law passed. Title IX of the 1972 educational amendments changed women's sports and opportunities for women in educational opportunities. Now, it's become strictly a sports thing. Sports was just a byproduct of it. Basically, this is what it was. If you were a woman, you had equal access to education. You no longer were told you could be a nurse, you could be a secretary, you could be a teacher, or you could be a housewife. In 1969, Stuart Gates was my 9th grade teacher at Spring Valley Junior High School, and we're all sitting around one day, and Stuart Gates is saying, well, you're going to be going to college soon. And because you're going to be going to college soon, you should start be thinking about what you might want to do in college. And for all the young ladies in the classroom, one of the things you might consider majoring in college is majoring in 3 letters, MRS. Stuart Gates, 1969. But, we're not accepting of Title IX, particularly the Women's Tennis Tour. Now, if you remember the late 60s, and I know you don't because you were not born then. I was just 13 years old. Philip Morris Company introduced a cigarette for women. It was called the Virginia Slims. And they had this great ad campaign that included a song. You've come a long way, baby. You even got your own cigarette today. Come a long way, baby. Well, Billie Jean King organizes the tour. It's 1973-74. Of course, you have the Surgeon General's report in 64 saying that smoking is harmful to individuals. Billie Jean King goes knocking on every door she can in New York looking for money, and there's only one company that's willing to offer her money. That's Philip Morris for the Virginia Slims brand. And I talked to Billie Jean King about this about 10 years ago. We were just talking about Bobby Riggs and all that nonsense about, women being equal to men, all that stuff. So we were talking about that, and that network spectacular, that Howard Cosell narrated. And she said, well, that was like, I don't know why I did it, but I had the weight of the world on my shoulders to prove that women were equal to men. And then I realized that he was a 55-year-old guy. So if I beat a 55-year-old guy, I'd be the 55-year-old guy. If he beat me, he'd be the 29-year-old, and what's that say about me? Billie Jean King. But anyway, the bigger decision was, what should we do about money? I mean, we need the money. We definitely need the money. But it's a product that could kill you. In the end, they took the money because they wanted to get it off the ground. Mexico City. That was 50 years ago on Tuesday. Remember when I started out, I showed you that patch. Olympic Project for Human Rights. Okay? He's got it, John Carlos, he's got Tommy Smith, Peter Norman has it. Peter Norman borrowed it from a teammate. He said, can I have one of those buttons just to put on? 200-meter relay. People have probably forgotten it was a 200-meter relay race. Tommy Smith wins. John Carlos comes in third, Peter Norman. Peter Norman has a role in this protest. Maybe a very quiet role, but he has a role. This little patch would cost him in Australia for the rest of his life. Also, the fact that he recommended to Carlos that the gloves be split. Tommy Smith would have the right glove, Carlos the left glove. They were barefoot. They wore beads. They had scarves around their neck to protest lynching. No shoes, protesting poverty. They have the badge there. It looks like a black power salute. Some ways it is, some ways it isn't. They get up on the podium and they're playing the national anthem. This is the ultimate, absolute ultimate in protest. Before I get to Smith and Carlos, I want to talk a little bit about Peter Norman. Peter Norman was an Australian, world-class athlete, finished second in this race. He goes back to Australia and he's a non-person. Why? He helped Carlos and Smith on the podium during their protest. He made the suggestions with gloves, and he's wearing the Olympic Project button. There were about 50 of them, a number of countries that wore it, but Peter Norman got punished for that. Goes back to Australia, tries to resume his athletic career, does, wins every race going through the competition. They wouldn't let him compete in the 1972 Olympics in Munich. Meanwhile, these two guys are thrown out of the Olympic Village by Avery Brundage. Avery Brundage, of whom Howard Cosell once said came of age during the time of William of Orange. They're thrown out immediately. Brundage gets really upset, saying that there's no room for protests, political protests, in the Olympics. Of course, Brundage assured Jeremiah Mahoney back in 1936 that the Fuhrer, his friend Adolf Hitler, and he was business partners with Hitler, there'd be no problems during the 1936 Olympics. In 1972, Brundage said the 1936 Olympics was the finest Olympics ever recorded. 1936 Berlin. 1956, there were countries that boycotted the 1956 Melbourne Olympics because the Soviet Union invaded Hungary. In 1964, South Africa was thrown out of the Olympics. They had this. So Avery Brundage talked about, well, you know, there's no room for political protest. There were no Olympics in 1940 or 1944 because there were war, ultimate political protest. So he throws these guys out. Tommy Smith goes back home. John Carlos goes back home. They do not go back to Heroes Welcome.